In this video, I'm going to be testing out the Sunlu Water Washable Solid Grey Resin to see how their basic water washable resin turns out. Full disclosure, they did send this over to me free of charge, but it's not a sponsored video, so I'll do my best to keep it as honest as possible. So water washable resin is one of those big fads that loads of people do seem to like. I completely get it. It means you don't have to have alcohol on site, but it does tend to mean it's a little bit more brittle, at least in my experience. So when it comes down to using it for miniatures and stuff like that, it's always interesting to see how that turns out. Now, I printed a range of different things for this just to kind of test it out. And the first thing I can say is the quality is really good. One thing that I did discover with this, which I thought was odd, is that you do need to lower the exposure, which does make sense in an extent. If you're using things like ABS or flexible resins, I always find that they're harder to print with because as they're printing, they flex and that can cause some issues. So with this, I had to lower it down. I think I was using 1.7 seconds originally on my standard profile on the Anycubic, and I lowered it down to 1.5. When I had it on 1.7, the quality was all blown out. It was losing loads of details and stuff like that. So lowering it down made it much better. With that rant aside, quality was really nice. I printed off a whole bunch of different Grimguard stuff, and you can see everything on there very nicely. It all looks fantastic, and I'm really happy with the way they turned out. I printed off this mech walker as well because I wanted to see how well it worked in terms of warping and stuff like that. So some resins, when you're printing them, you get a little bit of warpage, you'll get some bits which then don't fit together very nicely. And I would say this is a really impressive resin in the fact that there's very, very little warping. And in fact, I would say no warping at all, at least for something like this. I've used one of the other Sunlu resins, which is one of my favorite ones, which is the Sunlu ABS light resin. It's really good because it's great quality and it's really durable as well. It's nice and flexible. So for miniatures, it's fantastic. But I have found on that one, for example, that I get more warpage. When you come to put things like vehicles together, they don't fit quite as nicely, they need a little bit more cleanup. This pretty much out of the pot is ready to use and put together, and it certainly takes a lot less cleanup afterwards. So quality-wise, I think it's a really, really nice resin. But of course, how does it perform when you drop it and knock it and stuff like that? You know, all those things that will happen to you when you're on the gaming table and someone knocks your miniature off the table. Is it going to survive? And the answer is it did much better than I expected it to. It doesn't quite compare to some of the ABS light resins that you will find out there, but it did a decent job. Now I use, for this, I print off all these demons from one-page rules, and I print off 15 of them. And the idea is that I'll drop them from different heights. So you've got your low height, which is, I guess, a coffee table height, your medium height, which is a table height that you'd have for your standard gaming stuff, and then top tier height. I dropped 5 from each of those different heights and see how many of them survive. Now, on the low height, 4 out of the 5 of them survived, which is pretty good. On the medium height, 3 out of the 5 survived, which is less than impressive, unfortunately. But then on the top height, 4 out of the 5 survived. So a bit kind of backwards there, but I suppose it depends on how they drop and what bit they land on. So all in all, not as bad as I was expecting it to be when it comes to a standard water washable resin. So hats off to them there for making this at least a little bit flexible. Of course, I've painted some of these up as well so we could see how well it takes paint and everything there. No issues yet. And to be fair, I don't think I've ever had a single issue with any resin not taking paint well or primer well and stuff like that. So I'll continue to do that, but not had any issues with it. So I guess in summary, is it worthwhile picking up? And again, that all comes down to you and your individual setup and stuff like that. Water washable resins have their place. I completely understand that not everybody wants a big tank of IPA in the back, in their house or anything like that. It's smelly, it's fumy, it's kind of dangerous as well. So having the ability to wash your models in water washable resin is quite nice. So I completely understand the appeal for it. Just make sure that when you do dispose of your water, you dispose of it correctly. You still need to make sure everything's cured inside of it. Ideally let it evaporate. So it does come with its pros and cons as well, just to be mindful of. But I'd say the big benefit of this resin is it's really easy to work with. Like I mentioned, ABS type resins or any of those flexible resins that I've tested on the channel in the past are really good, and they're getting to a stage now where I'm having very few issues with them getting this print nicely. But I do find a little bit more warpage on them, and they are a little bit harder to work with. Something like this, if you are new to resin 3D printing, I don't think you can really go too far wrong with any of the basic resins now or the water washable resins because they don't have quite as much flex, and that makes them easier to print with, at least in my experience. So if you're new to the hobby, or if you just want to be able to print something off without any issues, then this is a worthwhile one to check out. Also, if you are looking to print off vehicles, for example, so if you're printing off something like this walker by Station Forge, if you're printing off tanks, if you're printing off larger prints, that don't need to have as much flexibility as something like this, because you don't have to worry about the chainsaw getting like snapped off, then again, it's a decent resin to be looking at because it's going to be cheaper, a little bit more budget, easier to work with, very low warpage so you can put it all together nicely afterwards. And again, something that you can't really go too far wrong with. So thank you so much to Sunlu for sending this over to me. It's a nice resin. It's another alternative to consider. It's done better than some of the other like standard or washable resins that I've used on the channel in the past when it comes to that drop test. And yeah, overall, I'm pretty impressed with it. For tanks, vehicles, large prints, buildings, terrain, stuff like that, I would definitely consider something like this. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below. What do you use different types of resin for? Are you like me? Do you have like your ABS and flexible resins for your tiny little miniatures? And then starting to use stuff like this for your larger miniatures? Be interested to know your thoughts down below. And thanks so much to Sunlu for sending this over to me. It's been a joy to use, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye.